This is the #1 paddle that I've been recommending to players in 2024. I'm sorry, I can't even say that with a straight face. Get this out of my sight immediately. Paddle production has absolutely exploded in 2024. So much to the point where it's getting more and more difficult by the day to answer the question, what paddle do I actually recommend? How's it going, y'all? I'm Rafa, the Pickleball Tech Dude. I'm an ex-PPA employee, a Harvard-educated engineer, and a seasoned pickleball product tester. And very recently, I finally think I found the answer to what paddle I can recommend to the vast majority of people at this stage in 2024. Now, granted, I've hit hundreds of paddles at this point, and this recommendation definitely is subject to a little bit of recency bias. But the data that I've collected and my on-court experience seem to really back up my thoughts here. So without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Honolulu Pickleball Sword and Shield J2K. Let's talk about it. The Honolulu Pickleball Sword and Shield J2K, which I'll refer to as the Honolulu J2K for the rest of the video, had a lot of really attractive stats on paper that caught my eye right off the bat. This is all the hard data that I collected about the paddle, and feel free to pause the video for a few seconds if you need some more time. Also note that my code RAFA-Kevlar will give you $20 off this paddle, bringing the total to $135 pre-tax, and I'll have a link that directly applies my code down in the description. But let's hop quickly through the key stats that I felt like had the most impact on player experience. Despite being a hybrid arrow curve shape, which theoretically should have reduced the swing weight below average, my measurement at 115 really puts this paddle in the middle of the road comparison to everything else on the market. And I think a lot of that has to do with the balance point of this paddle measuring at 9.35 inches from the end of the handle, making this a head-heavy paddle. The grip length at 5.5 inches really stuck out to me as having enough room for hitting two-handed shots comfortably for the average person. And this is a unibody Gen 2 paddle, meaning that it's also thermoformed and foam injected around the perimeter for a better sweet spot. And so that was all well and good to see on paper, but let me tell you what actually stood out about this paddle's performance on the court. $16mm core paddles appear thicker than a lot of other paddles on the market, and they're intended to feel a lot more forgiving than their thinner core counterparts. And using thermoforming technology along with foam-injected perimeters is intended to enhance that forgiveness and also increase the size of the sweet spot. And I can say without a doubt, this paddle had one of the most forgiving and large sweet spots on any paddle that I've tested this year. It's really not something that I'm used to these days with all these paddles that have long break-in periods, but very early on in the play sessions with this paddle, I could tell that it had a sweet spot that was very easy to master. And that, combined with the twist weight that I measured at 707 on this paddle, really made this paddle super easy to control. If you've ever hit a shot and you thought that it felt good, but it ends up hitting the net or just flying a little bit too high, that's something that you definitely avoid with this paddle. I'm a huge believer that companies that are using Kevlar as a face material correctly are able to enhance your ball feel to a much greater degree, which is a massive part of control for me. Furthermore, twist weight is a stability metric, indicating how easy it is to hit a shot that doesn't go straight in the center of the sweet spot. Anything with a twist weight above 6.8 is considered extremely elite. Meanwhile, anything measuring under 5.5 is generally pretty unusable and would only be recommended to super advanced players. So when I measured this paddle's twist weight to be at 707, it was one of the highest twist weights that I've measured on a hybrid paddle this year, period. That definitely translated to the court. You would be hard-pressed to find another hybrid paddle with the same combination of stability and ball feel that gives you the level of control that the Honolulu J2K does. You'd probably have to go towards a wide-body paddle like the Valere Mach 2 or the Spartus Apollo or the Bread and Butter Fat Boy to get the same effect. Side note here, but while this paddle's handle looks very similar to a lot of other paddles out there, somehow the way it's constructed felt very comfortable in the hands while still enabling you to feel the bevels. So really all that's left here to talk about is the paddle's power characteristics, which were also great in my opinion. Unfortunately, the head heaviness of this paddle is decently easy to feel pretty early on into a session. So I would say if you're a player who either A, tends to hold the paddle towards the end, B, is looking for really lightning fast hands, or C, see is just generally on the weaker end as a person, this paddle might not be for you. What I can say though is that head heaviness definitely translates into the power and pop characteristics. I was averaging speeds of 53.0 miles per hour over the course of several serves with this paddle using my radar gun. That definitely puts this paddle in the all-court leaning control category. And something that doesn't quite translate through the screen unless I explain it is that a lot of paddles that I've experienced within this 52 to 54 mile per hour range, you can really lay into the ball a lot more without worrying about it going too long or too short. There is something about this power range of paddles, especially when you have one with a really decent sized sweet spot like the Honolulu J2K, where you can feel like you've absolutely smacked a ball and somehow it tends to stay in the majority of the time. Of course, the paddle being able to achieve high spin rates of up to 1,956 RPMs in my testing doesn't hurt, but there was just a different level of comfort that I felt with hitting hard shots with this paddle. I noticed that on shots where I was actively trying to snap my wrist or really slap a ball a little bit harder than I would normally, I was still able to keep a really good level of control and shot placement. Now again, that head heaviness does come back into play when you're dealing with shots that use a little bit more wrist, like rolls and flicks, or just really high level topspin drives. However, it still felt like an overall really comfortable experience to use. That's probably the word that I would use to describe the experience using this paddle most. It's comfort, it's Goldilocks levels of control and power for me. So to summarize, this is why I say I recommend this paddle to the vast majority of people that ask. Most people who tend to ask me for recommendations are intermediate level and up. So they tend to be looking for that next paddle that's going to take their game up a notch and it's going to last them several months. So you might wonder why I would recommend an all-court leaning control paddle as opposed to all-court leaning power or even the most powerful paddles on the market, which theoretically should be the most easy to use, and right now legally is probably the Gearbox Power Pros. And to be honest, the primary reason is that the vast majority of people need to be working on enhancing their control and shot accuracy as opposed to adding more power, which is really easy to learn to generate. And so for me right now, to the average player, what this paddle has in terms of stability and forgiveness, massive sweet spot size, and ability to still hit decent power levels even with the level of control and softness that it has, it's just unmatched in terms of what it can give you as an average player. Now, I had other paddles in the mix when I was thinking about making this video. For example, the 6-0 Double Black Diamond, the Addict Infinity 8, the Athos M1 Legion, the Chorus Shapeshifter. And ultimately what it came down to is all of these paddles were either too soft or a little bit too high on the swing weight scale to where it felt like your hand speed was a little bit detrimentally going down, or the sweet spot simply was not as forgiving. And those factors were really what the Honolulu J2K sort of compensates for in your gameplay. Some of them got very close, like the Chorus Shapeshifter would have been this video right now if I didn't feel like the swing weight was a little bit higher to the point where it's a little outside my comfort zone for recommending, again, to the average player. That review is going to feel very similar to this one when that comes out. Of course, one of the last things I look at when it comes down to it is bang for buck. What type of value are you getting when you're purchasing this paddle? And with several of the paddles that I just mentioned being in the $200 plus range or approaching that, there's really very few other paddles on the market, especially with the same level of specs that I've just discussed, that can really compete with the Honolulu J2K right now. And you might be wondering why I went for the J2K as opposed to the J2K Pro, and the honest reason is that I hit this paddle a lot more than the Pro. I felt like the Pro made some improvements in terms of spin, but overall the ball feel felt a bit more muted, and overall characteristics wise they felt very similar. So I went for the J2K because it's a safer option, it's a little bit cheaper, and if you're looking for that next level paddle to upgrade to, or just a paddle with more consistency, I just felt safer recommending the J2K. But yeah, that's all my thoughts on the Honolulu J2K right now. I feel like the main people that should not go for this paddle are the people who already have a paddle type or maybe even a specific paddle itself that you feel very comfortable with. There's such a massive world of paddles out there right now that trying to search around can lead you down so many rabbit holes that it'll be impossible to choose. So if you're in a place right now where you're trying to transition to a more high level paddle, or you're looking for a paddle with just some more consistency of play overall, then that's where I'd recommend the J2K, which does tend to be the vast majority of people that ask me for recommendations. If you haven't already, make sure you like the video and you subscribe for my future reviews and my sort of news coverage at this point of all the drama happening in the paddle world. I'm definitely dreading, but also a little bit on pins and needles, waiting for what the next segment is going to be in that saga. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.